Welcome to CRE Fast Five, where we detail hot topics in commercial real estate in 5 minutes or less. I'm Carly Iacono, and today we are talking about 1031 exchanges. So let's start with what is a 1031 exchange. At its most basic level, it is a construct that allows an investor to sell one property and transition to another by deferring capital gains taxes indefinitely. So obviously this is a very useful tool because you can reinvest the full value of your deal and not have to pay taxes on the front end. Okay, so let's run through what the requirements are. First, you must use a qualified intermediary or QI. A qualified intermediary is not your broker, it's not your attorney, it is actually a separate professional who handles 1031 exchanges exclusively. This individual or company will help you fill out the paperwork, they'll go through all the nuances of your specific situation and make sure everything's done correctly. So make sure you're choosing a very strong and qualified intermediary. The second is the property that you are selling and reinvesting into must both be held for investment purposes. So you could sell an apartment building and buy a net lease property. You could sell an industrial property and buy a retail strip center. You cannot, however, sell an investment property and then reinvest into something that you will be living in, a primary residence or a vacation home that you will be living in. You also cannot exchange into something that you already own or something that a relative or family member already owns. Now let's talk about the timeline. So the timeline is really very rigid, and this is where a lot of people get into trouble if they don't follow this exactly. There are two key pieces here. The first is the identification period. The identification period is 45 days from the day that you close. After those 45 days, you have another 135 days to close. Now, it's never the 135 days where people run into trouble. It's always that 45-day ID period. So how do you avoid that? You start early, you start looking at replacement properties long before you close, and then within those 45 days, you should have a very good idea of what your replacement property is going to look like. So let's talk about that ID period and how you make that successful and what your options are for the way your ID is structured. There are 3 different ID rules that you can choose from. The first is called the 3 property rule, and this is really the most common. Under the 3 property rule, you can identify 3 properties of any dollar value and close on 1, 2, or 3 of those. Now, this gives you flexibility if you want to trade into 1 property. If you wanted to diversify into 3, it might not be the best option for you because then you would not have any backups on your ID. The second option is called the 200% rule. Under the 200% rule, you can identify any number of properties that you want, but they cannot exceed 200% of the value of your relinquished property. So if you are looking at an all-cash exchange or something with very low leverage, then this could be a good option for you to get the maximum number of backup properties. The third and least common is called the 95% rule. Under the 95% rule, you can identify any number of properties for any dollar value, but you must close on 95% of everything that you identify. So this is really used for large portfolio transactions with there are a lot of smaller properties and one in which the investor also wants to use leverage. Again, the 3 property rule is most common, but you don't need to finalize which one you're going to use until well into your ID period. So you want to wait and see what you're purchasing and then see which rule fits best. Now let's go through what goes wrong. It's really very straightforward. We recommend all of our clients transitioning from one property into another. In terms of investment, do use a 1031 exchange. Obviously, avoiding capital gains tax is very important, but if you don't have the right professionals around you, if you don't have a good broker, you don't have a qualified intermediary who's experienced, then your exchange can be invalidated. So you want to make sure that you have the right team around you, you're following all of those time frames, and you start early. Get your paperwork done early, understand the process, and start looking at replacement properties long before your identification period comes to a close. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out anytime. We handle a lot of 1031 exchanges and would be happy to help. That is CRE Fast Five. I am Carly Iacono.